Welcome to the Heart of Soul podcast, an exploration of who you are, what you are, and why you are, offering new ways to investigate age-old questions at the heart of you. Hi, it's Joseph, and thanks for listening to the Heart of Soul podcast. In this episode, we delve more deeply into the repercussions of a God that is only omnipresent and not omniscient or omnipotent, as discussed in the last podcast. The discussion takes us into examination of atheism, religion, and how the divine doesn't will to manifest as we commonly think as a society. This leads us to address more wrinkles of absolute truth previously addressed, the difference between belief and discovery-based orientations toward life, the nature of evil, and of course, much more. I remind you, as always, to please listen to this podcast from the beginning and in the episode order. Thanks for listening. Well, welcome forward. That may be the new catchphrase. Every, entertainment type, infotainment, whatever this is, everything needs a catchphrase.
Yeah. Yes. And of course, the default has always been welcome back.
Yes. Welcome back. Yeah. Because, there's an implicit kind of, we want you to stay exactly where you are. Welcome back to the thing you are just unfamiliar enough for this to be entertaining, but not so unfamiliar as to be uncomfortable. Welcome back to that. Anyway, Stace, you wanted to talk about, you sent me a message prior to us recording to talk more about the repercussion of God that is only omnipresent and not omniscient or omnipotent, which we talked about last time. You wanted to have a follow-on, a sequel to that. Where should we start today with that?
Well, something really interesting happened to me. I'd like to just reference here before we dive in to, I think, one of the most impactful new ideas about the nature of divinity that's ever been offered. Now, that sounds a little bombastic, but I'm going to try to support that with our talk about it today. But as an idea, this is what struck me midweek. In the domain of ideas, I actually had an experience Wednesday, I think, Joseph, Tuesday or Wednesday, where I had to stop for a moment because I literally felt I heard somebody who has been listening to the podcasts with Third Eye.
Careful, you're going to sound like a televangelist. They would say that, right? You, the one with MS. I'm talking to you right now. I'm sorry, just teasing.
Yeah, but except I can't see anybody. It's a third eye intuitive thing. Anyway, this person was a little upset with us, and I heard. And if this happens to actually be a person out there in listening to this podcast, if I nail this and that was you, let Joseph know I'd like to talk with you.
Yeah, for sure.
It'd be lovely. But I heard someone after listening to, I don't know which podcast, he was listening with another person. It might have been a woman too. I can't quite tell. But there were two people, I think, and one said to the other, with the state of the world being as upside down as it is, and all the pressures and conflicts and divisions going on, these two guys are talking, like this is fun. They get so they talk with each other and they laugh a lot and they make light of things. They don't mock anything, but they make light of things. And I don't know about that. Where's their connect to what's really going on in the real world? Something like that.
I would love to speak to that.
Yeah.
Go on.
Well, I heard it as if it was in the next room. And so I just want to frame our talk today, for example, on the nature of what divinity might actually be comprised of. Ideas. It's ideas that change the world. In ways that drop something like a stone into the water pond, and the little ripples go out and start ringing bells here and there and there and here. that all the great movements start with ideas. Even great spiritual teachers start with some idea, even though if it's dualistic and they're enlightened, it's still a dualistic idea. But whatever the domain, philosophy, psychology, spirituality, religion, empiricism, science, ideas are what help move the world. Not the only thing that moves the world, but help move the world, the human world. And so what I'd like to how I'd like to frame this is that to this person that I thought I heard, that yes, Joseph and I get excited about ideas and then try to parse them and interpret them and find the limitations of them, or find that some of them don't have limitations. But we're excited about ideas. And that's the way we have to start here. Mm-hmm. The idea about God is a really important one, as I think we'll get to as we get through this. But I would like to say to that person who said that, the reason that the world is in the mess that it is because the ideas that drive our world, not just mentalized ideas, embodied belief systems as ideas. Yeah. It is exactly those upstream ideas, positions, and belief systems that secondarily, symptomatically cause our upheavaled world. And so when we get excited about ideas, we're actually talking about what's necessary to change the upheaval and the divisions and all the difficulties that we find personally and globally. So I just wanted to answer you, whomever you may be out there in audio land listening to this, or eventually when this gets mounted in video form too. Yeah. I just wanted to say that we celebrate the exploration of new ideas for psychology, philosophy, spirituality, religion, money, sexuality, all the domains that are important to human beings. This series is about exploring ideas that move the world.
Yeah, everything starts out as an idea. Technology, the house that you're sitting in, everything. I'm glad you brought that up because I can imagine some people hear us talk and maybe think that we're in some kind of metaphysical or philosophical ivory tower and not actually connected to the world. But for me, talking about ideas, there's a kind of it's sort of like the pure math, kind of like to take a joy in the a right angle, even though you can't find one in reality actually, because I feel elbow deep or neck deep in the world almost every moment of every day, and the latest mass shooting and the latest politician trying to solve a very old problem in a way that it's easy to see will never work. And in this last few weeks, it's like I was just saying to my beloved last night, I hope that I live long enough to see things get better, because seeing things get worse and worse is getting really difficult. And it would be a shame to die, tomorrow and have only witnessed the decline of civilization to this degree and not have it resolve, like kind of a movie that, it's like if the Star Wars trilogy ended after Empire Strikes Back, you'd be like, wait a minute, it can't end on a down note. And so I have a joy in sort of admittedly kind of retreating in the ideas as pure ideas. And when I'm working with people, I'm, playing with the ideas and also navigating the defenses of people and the difficulty of applying it and the uniqueness of situations, and like, oh man, that stuff is really, really hard. And there's a joy in the purity of the ideas that is admittedly a little bit escapist, but also totally necessary for it to be applied to anything.
Yeah, ditto on this end of things. Every day I read every possible thing I can read and listen to and watch that tells me about what's going on in the world today. Before the internet, I read 3 newspapers every day.
I remember, yeah.
I've never been detached from reality in that way. So there's an and here to the erstwhile a person whom I might have heard on the airwaves, not these airwaves, the etheric airwaves, that there's an and between ideational exploration and celebration and a wholesale and retail inhabitation of what's going on in the world.
And maybe that's part of being in the world, but also not in the world and also not of the world. It's like because if you can't ever go into pure ideas, well, if nobody ever did that, there'd be no calculus, there'd be no computers, there'd be no space travel, there'd be no everything's, any new breakthrough starts as a pure idea long before it can be applied.
Jesus's spermless birth is an idea. Right?
Surely it is.
So
probably that
has moved billions of people over the last 2,000 years into dedicated lifestyles. Mm-hmm. That one idea. It's an interesting one that we can one day talk about here, I think. But let's get on to the idea about a radical reformulation of divinity away from religious standpoints, virtually all of them. All religious standpoints incepted in the axial age, way long time ago, pre-psychological age, declares that God, to be God, must be omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent. No seams anywhere. All three domains covered. And where has that idea gotten us?
Oh, man, what a question. I can't wait to hear you answer that.
Where has that idea gotten us? There has been more violence, hatred, vituperation, torture, murder by religious domains of human activity, more than any other domain in the history of our planet. Mm-hmm. That's where, without much exaggeration, that God is omnipresent, omnipotent, and omniscient. That's where it's gotten us. I think basing our human lives and belief systems on that idea, with that resultant that I just articulated, should bring into question the sanity of that position. So this was something that was bothering me even when I was a teenager in religion class in a Catholic high school, all-boy high school. The girls' high school was across the campus. And yeah. So let's take this apart for a moment, because if God is not omniscient, not omnipotent, and not omnipresent, or if it's not all three, something radically reconfigures all of religion and a good share of Western spirituality in general, right? So our identity offers that most of that violence and all of the difficulty and cruelty and murder and execution and persecution and genocide that has happened in history is because religion has a picture of God that has never been accurate, ever. This is how big an idea this is. The idea, for example, in between Zoroastrianism and the rise of Judaism, with the Judaism standing out among all others, saying, we're God's pet favorites. Mm-hmm. That's their idea. And that separated them from everyone else vying for notoriety or teaching expansion at the time, and still exists to this day.
Oh, yeah.
Can anyone spell spiritual racism? This is, it just boggles me that you never hear a philosophical deconstruction of this position.
Well, that would be attacking their beliefs, and there's a First Amendment preventing that or something. Right?
Of course. Yeah. But anyone is free to believe anything they want, if the identity says stay with everything until it dead ends, that's fine.
And you're not supposed to apply critical thinking to the religious or spiritual, is what we're taught.
Well, that's because that admonition right there is because it's a result of a pre-psychological age and a pre-empirical age, right?
Oh, I never made that connection. Yeah.
Oh, baby, yes. So that's not only ridiculous; that doesn't even apply to the topic at hand.
Yeah.
It's spiritually racist for the Judaism to say that they are God's favorite chosen people.
So is that why they would draw a different kind of racism as kind of karma to teach them the lesson of this is what you get if you think you're special?
You take the words right out of my next phrases here. This is why the Jews as a peoples have been honestly and truly persecuted, because it's their distorted karma coming back at their position, which is not a stretch to say is the ultimate arrogance.
Yeah.
Right. So that will continue. The Jewish people both as an ethnicity, an ethnic group, and as a religion. It will never stop until they get that is utterly impossible for the living, real God to have any pet favorite. It's as silly as in high school when you've got the two football teams playing in a high school, and each side is invoking God to help them beat the enemy.
Right. Like, see, any high school south of the Mason-Dixon line today, yeah, is probably doing that. But they pray in the locker room, right? The coach will lead a prayer.
Absolutely. And so, wait a minute. Can you imagine how absurd it is to divine being listening for the Russians through the Russian Orthodox pray to their God to defeat the Ukrainian rebels, and the Ukrainians praying to that same God to defeat the evil nationalistic Russians. Yeah. Can you imagine what that is like every day? The volume of those prayers, and divine being in Identity's offering hears everything, because it's omnipresent. It cannot help be omnipresent, as we said last time, because if anything is outside of God's presence, then God isn't God. God is inside of something else bigger than God, right? So nothing can be outside of God. So God hears that. Divine being hears that, as complex as it is, every day. And so omnipresence alone is enough, and we'll get to that in a moment. But let's deconstruct omniscience and omnipotency, okay? Omnipotency, sorry. Okay. Omnipotency, the big hang up on that particular vector of our idea we're talking about today is it gets all hung up on why does God allow evil in the world if it is all powerful, right? And of course, there have been apologists who will strive to say, well, what that really means is that it's wondering why we don't stop evil. But wait, what's missing in that offering is that means God is not omnipotency, or they will say it could, but it doesn't. For that reason, it's up to us to stop it.
Right. Then it leads to the tests and temptation and all that other stuff.
All that stuff, right. And the same thing with omniscience. It knows everything at all times, past, present, and future. That would also mean that it knew Hitler was going to do what it was going to do. Stalin, who was even worse, more people, 72, 75 million people were killed by Stalin in his autocracy. God knew that was all going to happen, knew all the innocent soldiers that the Axis or the Allies sent over in World War II were all the ones who were going to die are not going to die, and that God knows everything. Well, as you beautifully said at the end of last podcast, not having a God that is all powerful, all knowing, and always present is scary for the religious rank and file. And you said something beautiful about that. By the way, did that digest anything any further for you?
Yeah,
Joseph?
I haven't been able to sit with it persistently, but I have sort of revisited it a few times in the last week. And what I feel when I sort of contemplate that is a sort of push from behind and an urging of my own self-authority. And I could feel like, oh, there's some part of me that really doesn't want to have that self-authority, that would much rather there be this omnipotent and omniscient authority that I can be underneath. And I can feel there's some hiding in me that's like really can't stay with that idea or feeling longer than a couple of minutes at a time. I've been revisiting it, yeah, but it's quite uncomfortable.
Okay, well said. Because if you actually let yourself feel that, and you feel the possibility that this offering of identities might be correct, if you're not scared, you're not feeling it. Mm-hmm. Our conditioning has gone so deep existentially to us in that it drives our belief systems about God in a very integral, foundational, fundamental way. So let's deconstruct and make the argument for this radical idea, which would change everything. It would also make room way downline counterintuitively for devotional aspects of humanity, religious and spiritual people who believe in some sort of divine being, contexting the human theater, and non-dualists, Eastern esotericism that says there's no God and no afterlife in any of the ways the religions have talked to us about. So both those possibilities happen with the deconstruction of these three elements. So what identity would start to say, we could do a genesis. Identity has a picture and a teaching of how God discovered it existed and what happened in the next couple of realizations. But let's hold that for the moment and make the offering first. That the mistake is, and this is where it diverges and becomes omniscience, omnipotence, and omnipresence, is that God created us. That implies a direct intent to create. I offer instead, when you get to know the real divine being, not the one of religion, which we'll talk about relative to atheism here too today, I hope, that the real divine being, and this is self-verifiable, the more you learn to grow more emotively mature, which automatically makes you emoto-spiritually more mature, that divinity unfolds inside itself. It doesn't intentionally create this and that and that and this. I was listening to Ricky Gervais the other day that if he's wrong about his atheism and had a chance to ask God one question, he would be, well, listen, God, if you really hate homosexuals, like the religionists say, why did you put the G-spot in men up their anal canal? This kind of lovely comedic spin on this question goes right to that. What if, and here's what identity asks people to live into the question of, what if this might be true? That divine being unfolds and discovers itself as it unfolds without having I'm going to manifest anteaters. I'm going to manifest apes. I'm going to make planets and dark matter and dark energy. Willfully.
Yeah.
It's not that divine being doesn't have will in identity's opinion. Mm-hmm. It's what if that's not the case? What if it watches itself unfold, and then as soon as it unfolds something, it goes, aha. And now from that moment, maybe has intention to shape some things.
Like pure art.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
An artist. The distinction I've heard is the difference between an artist and a craftsman or a craftsperson is that the artist doesn't know what they're going to create, but the craftsperson does.
Very well put. Divine being is an artisan. Mm-hmm. And primarily and only secondary a crafts being. It feels to me that it discovers itself as it unfolds. And this means that it can't be omniscient. It doesn't know how it's going to unfold until it unfolds. And then as it unfolds, it immediately is able to take in what just had unfolded and busily starts to put grace and balance and goodness and aliveness and support into what
that makes
it
a lot
has
of sense.
just unfolded. That's the question identity offers people to live into. Just live into that question.
Well, I'm smiling because it makes sense. That makes so much more sense, once you get a sense of how flow operates, when you actually start embodying some amount of the divine, like that's what happens to your life. You become less and less able to plan and intentionally manifest. But then I'm also secondarily laughing because, of course, that's the projection we have onto God, because before that happens for an individual, when you're living entirely from your mind, that's how you do everything. You decide exactly what you're going to do, you use your mind willfully, and then you do it. And then anyone who's dabbled in real spirituality even a little bit knows that's the first thing you start to lose.
Exactly right. Especially nowadays, now that the yin divinity is saturating our world now since 2012, what happens is it unfolds. You have to lose the will to manifest in some intrinsic way to grow spiritually. This also comports with really well with Eastern esotericism in a whole different domain, we would say, but it's still the meta rubric still applies there. In other words, divine being unfolds, and then once it unfolds, then it knows something about what it unfolded. And that knowledge, compared to us, as we said before, is omniscient, way more global, obviously, than anything our puny minds can get at. But so both omniscience and now omnipotence. If there's no will to manifest in God, because it's constantly unfolding.
Yeah, because it's not knowing its way through its experience. It's not willing its way. It's not knowing its way. And that's what we think is going on. Like there's some grand plan and all of that. Okay, so we're setting that aside. And
not 100%, but to great degree, because as divine being unfolds itself from my abidance, whatever that is, crazy or possibly accurate, once it unfolds itself, it does get committed to what it unfolded, and as it gets committed to what it unfolds, it becomes very active in supporting the good in everything that it is. And as self-reflective beings came into its unfolding, was astounded that what we call evil comes out of its unfoldment. It was as surprised as anyone else. In other words, here's another way to say it. Before human self-reflection came along, historically, and this is establishable by empirical science, is the world of animals preceded the world of self-reflective human beings. And when it saw that when the nature unfolded with semi-self-reflective beings, we call animals of all species, it noticed that there was a predator predatee orientation to nature that has this savage dog-eat-dog jungle orientation, that everything is eaten by everything else up the predator line. In other words, one set of beings unfolded within it eat another set of beings that unfold into it, and it was surprised. And from its point of view, since it sees everything as being born, a living and dying anyway, it doesn't have the same reaction of savagery. It's just what unfolded in it. And so what happens is, as it unfolded, it said, this is something that I have to live with and try to learn to support in its own way and see where it leads. Well, where that led as things unfolded and evolved, and we wound up creating, even before the world of animals, souls, which is a not disembodied, not yet humanized souls. That's another whole story, but we're just in this one domain for now. So the dog eat dog thing is, of course, atheists would say, well, what do you expect that there's evil in the world? We're just animals on the predator prey a slope line. And to get ahead, we have to, maybe we don't kill our rivals, but we outperform them. We outwill to manifest them. We out-ideate them. That's all part of the law of the jungle, and it all works fine for atheists. You see. But what's really interesting here is what I want to make a point, because I now remember what I wanted to say. When you said earlier about as below, so above, the only reason that specifically focused real spiritual growth involves letting go. Let go, let God. Stop trying to will to manifest. Watch what happens when you learn to stop that, process the terrors that come along with that. Where do you think, if God is omnipresent and you can't be outside of God, if that's our mode of unfolding, if that's our mode of growth, how could it be different for divine being? We are its children. We follow all of its natural natures. So if you believe that, if you're an ancient a Jew and believe that you're a God, one of God's chosen people, and that God is a punishing, jealous, envious God and wants you to kill any of the Assyrians or the Babylonians that were enslaving them, or the Egyptians at the time, you're going to be angry, and you're going to be racist, and you're going to be genocidal, because that's what your God informs you about consciousness. See? So if we unfold by dropping will to manifest, which is a survival mode, in order to learn how to thrive, which in spirituality is about inside to outside, not outside to inside, then divine being must have that quality of unfolding. Another argument how it's possible that divine being is not omniscient nor omnipotent. Okay, so far?
Yep.
So let's take another domain here. This affects, if you really start thinking about this and let it take you somewhere, this changes whole scads of dynamisms and bandwidths in other domains. If I were to say, Joseph, and I'd like to ask the question to anyone who's listening right now. If I said that God's only omnipresent and not omniscient and not omnipotent in the short ways I've offered, there is finally a bridge between atheism and real spirituality. You're so fast on the uptake, Joseph.
Well, it's the individual has power then, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. There's no self-authority comparatively, there's no self-authority for a human being if God is omniscient and omnipotent. And that's exactly the thing I've been noticing I'm resisting. There's some part of me that's like, I don't want that power. I don't want that. I don't want that agency. Sure.
Let's look at atheism from another door and then come back to this door really quickly. I've always been astounded, as much as I'm astounded by the idea of God's favorite chosen people has never been deconstructed. It
really is kind of on the nose, isn't it?
I just can't get it. I can't get atheism. I can't get it, because religion's teachings in so many ways, 90% of ways, are so inane, so fairy tale-ish, so bedtime story fairy tales. To be an atheist, you must take the teachings of religion so seriously that you think it speaks for a God. And since you have to take that seriously. If you didn't, you just be an agnostic. Okay. Yeah. But atheists have to take what religion teaches so seriously that they have to throw the whole enchilada out. not only religion, but the idea of God with it, right?
Well, what I get hung up on is that atheism don't realize that it's as much a belief system as the thing that they're rejecting. I mean, agnosticism and atheism tends to be used interchangeably, but they're completely different. Especially if someone's really relating to agnosticism in a earnest, I'd like to experience it, but I don't know yet way.
Right.
That's
unusual. Clean. That's clean and hopeful, and everyone should test that every single day. In Identity's offering, even of its own version of God, I doubt every day and see what might come out of that, right? So atheists take it so seriously that they throw the baby out with the bathwater. And just what you said, I'd like to pick up on. One of the proofs that God is omnipresent is that we godify all positions we take. we make little gods out of them.
Well, and that's because if God is omnipotent and omniscient, then absolute truth is a possible position to have.
Correct.
But if it's not, then absolute truth is even more somehow not possible for a human to have, because nothing and no one has it anywhere ever.
Never, not even God. Now, God's now moment may be 50 years. Ours may be this next millisecond.
Right.
Okay, that gives it a whole lot of depth knowledge, but it's not omniscient. If you drop out omniscience, you drop out absolute truth. You drop out absolute truth, and basically the foundation of all religions from the axial age collapse.
Yeah, I've just, as we've been talking, I've been feeling more into this, what is it like to drop the omniscient and omnipotent thing. And one of the things I notice, let's see if I can grab it out of my head here, it's like, when you just said we're talking about the now thing, it's like, it's so subtle in me, because like my defenses will only let me feel it a little bit. So I keep getting these little sort of darting glances of it, but it's like, maybe I've lost it. There's something that it doesn't want that. There's something in me that doesn't want that power. And there's like an exposure to life. It's like, okay, I don't know everything. That's what it is. I don't know everything, but something somewhere must, and I can like rest in that somehow. And if you take that away, there's like a rug pulled out. It's like, actually, no one and nothing does. You're on your own to figure it out. And there's an exposure feeling of like, oh God, I'm like, it's an aloneness. Like I'm alone on my path into the unknown. There's certain elements of it that nobody knows, nothing knows. And it's unprotected, unsupported. I'm on my own. And then I start to really feel like, if you were to turn that up, like multiply that times 100, I can imagine why somebody would really like religion, because it's this very cozy, God has all the answers, follow the rules and you'll be fine.
Yeah. And that just is, that's for young souls to start to orient to those kinds of belief systems. But let's take that notion in a little different direction here. Thanks for that. That was beautifully said. Einstein was not just a scientist, he was a philosopher, one of the rare philosopher scientists. And he said a couple of things that is really, really impressive. He's a true agnostic, He's the best example of an agnostic I've ever heard, who had critical thinking also. He said, no one knows enough to be an atheist.
Did he really? I didn't know that one. That. That's terrific.
And I would love to have chatted with him, because I would say, Albert, that also, would you also say then that no one knows well enough to be a religionist? And I would say he would do that and go, of course, you get me. You get what I'm trying to say here. So look at that balance scales here. No one knows enough to be a theist, and no one knows enough to be an atheist, absolutely on either end, right? We've talked about the nonsense of absolute truth a couple other times in podcasts.
Yes, we've entered that into the record for as evidence.
Yes. You take away absolute truth and the foundations of all religions collapse. This is about discovery of what's true, not believing what's true, right? We all have a right to our opinions, but we don't have the same right about our facts, right? And the fact is that no one can claim that they know anything absolutely, including the person who's speaking this right now, that even I doubt that statement, no one can know anything absolutely, I don't hold that as an ironclad fist in a closed fist. I just keep experimenting with that every single day, testing it. And so far, it turns out to be a universal truth, not an absolute truth.
Ah, that's a good distinction.
You see, identity is offering sets of universal truths to be tested every day in the domain where the rubber meets the road, where the human heart, soul, and body has to live some kind of human life with some kind of direction, with some kind of focus that results in well-being.
And I didn't see before the universal truths to be tested invites engagement in life, embodiment in life, a curiosity, as opposed to absolute truth to be believed absolutely in the mind. It's not curious. Then there's not an engagement. Then you're in your head with a foregone conclusion that filters out anything that will challenge the idea, and then you don't evolve, which is observable in people who hold those absolute truths.
And that's one of the reasons when the internet, which started out as a encyclopedia, became two-way, and human being, we could instead of just researching via the internet is how it started. When we got the ability to change the internet and allow Amazon and financial transactions and all this, and social media has exactly followed what you just said. It's the divisiveness of human beings' paradigms. Everyone is pushing for mine is right, yours is wrong. And that means, whether they're aware of it or not, that they have no curiosity about their truth. Mm-hmm. There's no dialogue in absolutism. There's only pedagogy, no dialogue. And that's what's happened in our social media world right now, in cancellation cancel culture stuff.
And then you have the algorithms of the social media, that because it wants you engaged on their platform. So whatever you believe, they feed you more of that opinion.
That's right.
That's frightening.
It's frightening. And this is when you first we started talking today, Joseph, when you said you hope to live long enough to see resolution, because we're only about 70%, and by my read, down the drain.
Oh, that's better than I thought. I would have guessed 30 or 40. That's good.
No, we're about 30. We have 30 to 40 more to go. And the further down it goes, the worse it gets.
My sense is 2029, 2030, about eight or 9 years more before we hit bottom.
Feels right. Feels right. So back to our main rabbit hole today. The omnipresence, but not the omniscience and omnipotence, makes me to say to an absolute oriented atheist, listen. Congratulations. If Jesus came back and somebody said, what do you think about atheists? And he would say, what's wrong with being an atheist? At least you're throwing away the fairy tales of a pre-psychological religions. So congratulations for having your own mind and heart and trying to find out your truth for yourself. Yeah. But wait, be careful. He would also then say, don't make an absolute of your truth. And the same way the religions you're rejecting made out of theirs, or you're just as bad as them. The God of atheism is no God. The God of Buddhism and Advaita Vedanta, Zen and Advaita Vedanta is not God.
And a no self.
And no self, that's a God of theirs too. Yeah. They worship, we can't help godifying. That's the track I want to get back on.
Oh, right.
Everything we do, we make a God out of. Anything that we feel applies to us. We're so insecure existentially as human beings. Identity offers, because none of us ever got what we needed in the cult of the family. Another whole cult, family cult.
Yeah.
That's another whole track we can talk about. But since we're all malnourished in the level of soul, because parenting has never been adequate. Parenting has never occurred in our race. We're so existentially insecure. We need these ironclad belief systems to make us feel safe, in the same way you referenced.
Yeah, and one of my unfinished books that I don't know if I'll ever finish it, was called False Gods, and we have this notion. It was in that's a commandment, right? Thou shalt not worship false idols and stuff.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But it seems to me the essential meaning of that was far more in context than in content. It wasn't about lining up idols and worshiping them, although that was an application. It was about allegiance to truth. And yes. False gods can be like an addiction is a false god. It's anything we ascribe a greater truth to than actually is. Is that how you would define it?
Yeah, I would say anything that we become addicted to is a false god. Whether it's alcohol, drugs, atheism, religionism,
work,
Tucker Carlsonism.
Tucker Carlsonism.
He is a world unto himself. Oh my God. Anything that you are not willing to not have, whether it's a belief system, a drug, a relationship, a person, anything you're not willing to not have as an adult.
Oh, because I see now, because it has an absolute sort of valence to it. Therefore, you're not in an inquiry, you're not engaged in reality testing it, so you're not in reality, so it's not God.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And this is what it gets me again. Wait, what? There's no curiosity in fundamentalist sects of religions. There's no curiosity. They have all the answers already. This is the opposite of divine being. My experience of divine being, there isn't even a word. Curious doesn't even come close. It is engaged in curiosity. It is saturated in curiosity in serving what unfolds inside of it. It's conscious of itself in two dimensions, yang and yin. Another whole topic for another podcast. But it is ultimately curious in what unfolds inside of it. And as it does that, that's what we're supposed to get when we're doing point on spiritual growth. We do not try to manifest, we try to unfold and then having curiosity about what unfolds in us and thereby seek truth. In postmodern philosophy, for example, it's very clear, and no matter which domain you look in, one of the elements is really common, is there's no such thing as any truth that any human being can ever know all the way. This is a very clear postmodern feature in philosophy. And identity would agree with it, so much so that it says anyone who is not willing to not have a belief is stuck. This person is dead-ended and can only spin where they are, flinging mud, judgment, divisiveness, and sometimes violence, right? So you take away absolute truth or our over addiction to a truth that we need because we're so feel empty inside or insecure inside that we need the safety of an absolute truth. This is psychopathologic. Religions create psychopathologic examples of itself in those conservative, scripture-driven kinds of theocracies that these people have. It's psychopathological to not have curiosity. They're addicted. They're addicted as any heroin addict. Sometimes worse so because they justify it because 9 times out of 10, if I was able to get to the unconscious of a Tucker Carlson or a Laura Ingraham, whatever her name is, I forget. They are absolutely doing whatever they say and hold on to the truth so that they can get into heaven. Because they believe and they've been taught that this is the truth. And if they don't abide by it, God will send them to hell, which is, well, they're not 9 years old anymore. I don't understand how these souls of children of God, brothers and sisters of mine, can hold on to such incurious lifestyles. It is the end of growth. No curiosity is the end of all growth. And what happens with all the energy that's in us about unfolding and growing? If that's stifled, it's going to back up like a sewer line. And as that backs up, you're going to be spewing nonsense and hatred and divisiveness and judgment. Exactly what the most fundamental of all sects do every single day. And all that sewage goes into the planetary consciousness every single day, along with all the suffering that it causes. So look what we're saying here in summation for this track. Reconfiguring divinity as being omnipresent. Oh, let me say one more thing before we sum up. Divine being does not stop what we call evil, because evil is created at the root by non-curiosity, absolutism. Every evil you can parse down to an absolute disorientation and addiction to a certain belief. Every single bit of evil. It doesn't stop that, because it gave us what we would call free will, our willfulness to manifest whatever we want. And then we're supposed to look what we create and then go, oops, that's an error.
Which is what God is doing, looking at what it creates and doing something with it secondarily. Yeah.
It doesn't stop what we call evil. It instead supports good. It supports good. And it speaks to our higher soulful aspects. So this is our world. We found ourselves inhabiting it. Divine being watched it unfold, watched as souls started incarnating in the ape line about 1 million years ago.
What does supporting good look like, though?
Supporting good supports Greta. What's her name? The young girl who's doing all the climate change activism. This young girl, Greta. She's the best example these days of a young child. She's a little older than a child now, a teenager. She's trying to do good. She doesn't spend her time in vituperation. When she, as a 14-year-old, however old she is, she shows sorrow at our denial of climate change, not vituperation. So what does supporting good look like? From underneath, divine being adds more higher octane emoto-energetic love bandwidths to those who are open and called upon to do some sort of activism to offset the people who are spewing garbage out of absolutism and to create divisiveness and suffering and pain. So that's what it does. It's a general rising tide raises all boats and sinks other boats.
So like consequences and people, the structure of life and how if someone's not living in reality, they dead end and there are negative consequences. That's part of the
that's a result of that. That's what I would say. You amp up the love pressure to show you've got your nose up against a dead end.
Yeah. When I remember
maybe this far spewing, holding, and all of a sudden, oh my God.
The founder of Aikido has this quote, when you align yourself with the principles of the universe, it conspires to help you.
Yes. That master was talking about divine being in its omnipresent suffusion and saturation of care and love and curiosity to all it creates.
And the inverse, of course, is implied. When you misalign with the principles of the universe, it dead ends you.
It dead ends you. Yeah. Every fundamentalist religionist on the planet is dead ended because it is not sharing divine being's curiosity about consciousness, about their consciousness. Right. So everything is going down the tubes, like we said. So we're only not even quite 70% there.
I'm pleased as punch about 70% because I'm running out of juice to be able to tolerate it. So.
Well, be careful because this is not an arithmetic progression.
Oh no.
This is a what's the opposite of the
geometric.
Geometric, like earthquakes.
Yeah.
Every next step is 100 times worse.
Oh right? No.
So. That way I want to throw a little cold water on your warmth there. But don't worry, it's not about time. It's about evolution, even though it does happen in time. Mm-hmm. So let's go forward now. by lots of things happen if we dump the ridiculous pre-psychological, pre-empirical notions of religion that says that God is omniscient and omnipotent. And if you want to reject those, look what happens in atheism. If you reject omniscience and omnipotence, you've got to reject omnipresence. God doesn't exist. God is not present.
Right. Yes.
You see? But if you single that out, God is omnipresent. We're inside of it at every moment. And notice I say he, it. I say it, not he, and it, not she, because it's a mix in a way that our minds can never understand. Mm-hmm. So if you dare to live into the question, what if God is omnipresent but not omniscient, omnipotent? There's not only a bridge to atheism, because, well, what kicks in here? If God
bridge to humanism is really what it is.
Humanism, even more so, because if God is omnipresent, it's always there to help you be curious and unfold and grow, right? It's a direct connection to our humanism, which, not uncoincidentally, identity in its metaphysical orientation says the personal is just as spiritual as anything else. And that this idea taught by all forms of most forms of Buddhism and Hinduism, esoteric anyway.
Yeah, that's another whole level, because the human is not essentially worse than God just because it doesn't know everything. Yes. You know, I never really saw that. It's like, well, it's just a matter of degree or a matter of order of magnitude, not essentially different in that way. Because if God is omnipotent and omniscient, then humans are fundamentally and essentially different then.
Yes. They live in a whole other domain that's not God.
Yeah.
Which is, there's no seams in God. Look at the worldview of Christianity. Heaven, hell, and somewhere in between is the human earth life. These are fundamentally different orders, not one whole bandwidth of being. So there's no demarcations here. We're seamlessly connected to God. And the answer to this, I've used this metaphor before, I'll say it again in this application. It's staring us in our face every moment we look at our hand. Here is the personal, human. Here is the soul.
That's the finger and then the hand.
Finger in the hand. Oh yeah, right. We haven't
for audio
this
people,
in video yet. The finger is connected to the hand seamlessly. There is a demarcation, but it's also seamless.
Yeah. Are the fingers individual? Well, in one way, the fingers are individual.
Of course, I can move one finger without moving any of the other fingers. In fact, I love to do that when we do this on
the Spock thing.
Yeah, but and the palm without the fingers is the soul, and the forearm is the soul umbilicus that connects us to the rest of the body of.
And what's also cool about that metaphor is even though there's an essentialness to all of those parts, you take away the arm. Would you say that was the soul?
The soul umbilicus.
Some umbilicus, and everything else is going to die really fast. So there's a dependency hierarchy.
This is not. Yeah, these are not semantic. This is not in the realm of semantics. This is in the domain of epistemics. What you just said, the vitality of the finger requires the vitality of the palm, which requires the vitality of the forearm, which requires the vitality of the body it's connected to. Mm-hmm. So this is how not only is there a bridge to humanism and atheism, with God is only omnipresent. It's the end of patriarchal axial age religions absolutism, because divine is unfolding itself in curiosity every single moment. The proof of it is that we, to grow, have to unfold and let go of over planning our route on planet Earth. We've got to make some parameters. I'm going to make this decision versus that decision. But in general, when you want to move from survival, once you have survival worked out to some degree, you have room for thrival. You've got to let go of will to manifest, especially in these yin-saturated days. So everything in identity is based on this. This is the primary structure of our provenance and how our providence unfolds through us. To the degree that I grow in my one trillionth, God grows. So, and nothing can grow without curiosity. So absolutism is anti-God. And that...
Whoa, that's ironic. Whoa.
Absolutism is anti-God. When are all the religions of the world going to fold up the tent on that one? It's time. Would it be great that you don't have to go through all these? Okay, I'm only in my 10th incarnation, so boy, I'm glad the Pope is there to make me feel like he's God's representative on earth, and what he says is going to get me to heaven. Whew, because life was really tough here. I don't understand what's going on. That's an innocent young soul. Would it be great that they didn't have to unlearn that in the next 150 lifetimes?
Yeah. So the absolute, unwavering, belief-based faith in God is actually anti-God.
Yes. That's what identity suggests, for people to chew on and see where it takes them. That's all. That's
not
all.
As a new absolute truth, but as something to test.
As a universal truth to be tested and see what happens. And if you get scared, you're onto it. Because we've been so conditioned to, like you beautifully said last podcast, that just like mom and daddy, they know everything. I used to ask my father where he hid his Superman suit, because I absolutely knew when I was 5 years old my father was Superman. You know? There was a lot of heartbreaking learning he wasn't. So the same principle here in our Father.
I often have the thought, I'm about to be 48, and sometimes I think about when my father was that age, and as a kid, how much I thought he knew then, and then sort of switch it around, like, oh my God, I can't imagine having, a 16-year-old kid, and they're looking at you like you know everything. Well, maybe not 16, but certainly 11 or something. And and just feeling that, like, wow, we project so much knowledge and power onto our parents, and then we reach that age and realize how little they actually have. That's just what we do, and even as adults with the divine, that's what we've been talking about. Yeah, consciously or not.
So I'm starting to hear some backwash already on the airwaves.
Let's respond to the questions that have not yet been asked.
Nice.
For my next trick.
Yes. I'm not calling, identity is not calling for the collapse of all religions. It's not calling for that. It's humbly suggesting that when you put together in your critical mind and your heart both, when they're in tandem, that if you really examine the nature of absolutism, you come up empty. It is impossible. The only way it could be possible if there was an absolutist God. So that you live with an absolute God who's jealous. God is jealous. It's jealous and envious and angry. What? Only neurotic people are envious and judgmental and angry like that in that way. Kill the Abyssinians, kill anyone who doesn't believe in you, believe in the one monad God. Religion created a neurotic God out of our own neuroses. It was innocent. It's okay. It was 2,500, 3,000 years ago. We didn't know about psychology. We didn't know about the unconscious. Philosophy hadn't formed yet as a congruent domain of human interest.
Yeah, critical thinking and spirituality did not go together.
So all of it's innocent and it's time to end. But I'm not calling for the end of its final play out called organized religion. I'm calling to the human beings to wake up in this world that religions don't speak for God. Atheists don't speak for not no God. Buddhists and Hinduists don't speak for not God. These are all projections of incomplete understandings of the divinity within which I start every moment, move through every moment, and end every moment. That divinity is palpable. I used to call it the God field. I still do in some ways. There is a God field that we are just arising out of every moment, and learning and curious and in that way giving a gift to divinity to learn about itself.
Yeah, you know, one of the ways I think about this a lot, that and when I teach this kind of stuff with people, what I've said is like, we're all dead ending a set of assumptions about reality all the time. Whether you're trying to fix your toaster and you have an assumption that maybe it's not plugged in or needs to be replaced, or you have an assumption about you know, what kind of car you should buy or what kind of computer you should get, or about women or men or whatever. We all have assumptions about different aspects of reality. And it's easy to observe that we learn when we dead end those. Oh, I was wrong. I needed 4-wheel drive and I only got 2-wheel drive. I was wrong. The toaster was plugged in. I had it on the wrong setting. I was wrong. Women actually have a whole set of gifts that men don't, or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And so if it's so observable that that's the case, then, you know, what I say to people is like, your value system, going all the way to the depth, you know, see our conversation about is it 8 or 9 elements of the paradigm? I remember it used to be 8. It was 9 now, right?
Well, like Fellini, we'll stick with 8.5.
Okay, 8.5. So if we're constantly making assumptions about toasters and cars and men and women, and why can't we look at our own values as assumptions about reality as well and see that we're testing them? So if someone is a Christian, Muslim, Jew, Jainist, Buddhist, whatever they are, what's so hard about saying you're testing that out? The same way we're testing identity out.
Yeah.
All you have to do is,
right.
All you have to do is drop the absolute grip and that you're so sure, and be like, look, take that. If that's what makes sense to you, take that all the way. But you'll learn faster if you can hold it with an open hand rather than a grip. And some of it will be right and some of it won't be. And we're all learning through dead ending. What's the problem?
And that directly relates. I just got this, linked this to that, Joseph. That was beautifully said. That's where the rubber meets the road. That's the best way to unhook from your dead end, is to just, what if it's not? What if I'm just testing and not I haven't found it yet? Dead end religionists think they found it.
Yeah.
And this is patently inane. I have no other word for it. Mm-hmm. So how do we sum all this up in terms of, again, always where the rubber meets the road? Let's pull it together with the whole meta frame of ideas, right? Mm-hmm. Ideas guide our curiosity, yay or nay, right? Human beings need paradigms. We have no innate thing except grunting survival. That's all we've got from the animal that we carry as part of us in our physicality, our survivability. That's the only innate thing we have. When we're hungry, we're going to eat. And when we get really hungry, we don't care if we have to kill something to eat it. These are innate. And nothing else is innate. No knowledge is innate except through, which is another topic of reincarnation and how that works. There is innate, but not innate in the physical body. So if you think you're an atheist and you're going to develop your own non-theistic kind of humanistic value system, cool. That's a step in the right direction. You don't need religion anymore, so you're going to have some midlives there, where midlife in your incarnational cycles, where you're going to be atheistic humanists. That's fine too, but be careful. When we say that, why not? If religions didn't exist, then we wouldn't have to unlearn so much over time. What's wrong with that? I once was giving a talk about the non-dual enlightenment. I was giving a Dharma talk, and there was I think, did I say this in another? Stop me if I have. You can edit this out.
It probably bears repeating, whatever it is.
Okay, there was a man in the high rows in the back. There were about 50, 60 people there, and he had a long beard. He looked very Lord of the Rings. What's his name?
The dwarf?
No, with the long beard, with the
Gandalf.
Gandalf. Yeah, he was modern dressed casually. And he was listening very silently the whole time. And I connected with him right away visually and nodded to him because I got that he was basically enlightened Maybe he was an enlightened person that wasn't famous. I don't know. At any rate, he came. I was making the case that someone asked me, "Wait, you're saying that there is a substantive I? It's not an illusion?" And I said, "Yes, that's right. How can you be enlightened and teach that?" This person. This is the track we're on, and I said, "Well, in my definition of enlightenment, you can't." Right. But this is the error of esotericism from the East, that they held absolutely onto the God of not self, that the self is an illusion. This is non-negotiable. We talked a little bit about that already. Right. So I made the case, as I hope we can make it in the next few podcasts, because we're on this track, about the sobriety of personal selfhood in spiritual contexts. So I made that argument. It was a wonderful 75 or 100, 110 minutes or something. Afterward, this gentleman, as I hoped he would, he came down and he was very serious. And he said, and he put his arm on my shoulder and he said, "Brother," I immediately knew what he meant. He said, "We can't tell them this, even if we know it's true, that the self actually can't be subtracted, only unattached to." Mm-hmm. And I said, "This is exactly what I teach." He said, "Well, but if you teach that they're there, I don't tell my students that there's no self, because if I do, it'll make it harder for them to enlighten."
Yep.
And I said, "What if it was the opposite?"
Yeah.
What's your basis of enlightenment? We had a short conversation. And I remember he said, "Well, like anyone else, transcendence of duality." I said, if your algorithm is duality transcendence, the illusoriness of the I becomes self-resonating, becomes resonant.
Yeah.
We don't use that in identity. We use processing the terror of not being emotively. And if you use that algorithm, it doesn't matter if you tell people ahead of time there is an unsubtractable I that we call the soul I. It is unsubtractable. And you only think it's subtractable if you use an algorithm of transcendence of duality. And he just looked at me, and all of a sudden, some dead end absolute that he had, you can't tell people we have a survivable I after enlightenment, because then it'll make it harder for them to enlighten. I said, that's something you're over attached to. What if it might be this other thing? So there's a beautiful example of, and then he walked away scratching his head, which he didn't have much hair like me. And I think I opened a door for him that day, because he was a true straight line Zen type of teacher. And which is why, as you said last couple podcasts, if I say such and such is a boil on humanity's butt, I couldn't be enlightened. Mm-hmm. In the non-dual way, because they simply don't talk like that. Well,
yeah, but then the question is, what are the metaphysical assumptions that would cause you to say that in a paradigm that says it has no metaphysics? Oy. It's enough to give you a headache.
You can get a migraine.
Yes.
There's so much more integrous good truth in Eastern esotericism than fundamental Christianity, fundamental religion of any kind. Mm-hmm. But that makes their absolutism worse. It's
far more subtle.
They should more subtle and more dangerous, because there's more truth in Eastern esotericism than Western religionism. Yeah. So the distortions that Eastern esotericism offers have more far-reaching damage.
Yeah, I'll often say to people, because the Eastern Dharma is so much sexier to Western people, because most of us were brought up in some kind of Judeo-Christianity. And then I'll ask people, what makes you think that Buddhism and Hinduism aren't just as distorted as Christianity, Judaism, right. Islam? Right. It's just a matter of where those distortions are, and we're raised. We've already dead-ended the Western religions, and then the shininess and newness of the Eastern Dharma is like, oh, this is a breath of fresh air. Well, how many lives do you want it to take you to find those distortions? Do you want to find it in one life, or do you want to spend 50 dealing with that?
Oh, Joseph, I love that you've got your rubber on the road right there with people in ways I don't at the moment. Anyway, so to conclude,
yeah,
Identity's version of God as omnipresent but not omniscient, neither omniscient nor omnipotent, is enlightened deism. The founding fathers that Christian fundamentalists think were Christians, and so want to create a Christian theocracy in America, when the Constitution they say they are devotees of says division of religion and
separate church and state. By the way, why is it that it says in God we trust on our money when there's supposed to be a division of church and state? Don't let the truth get in the way of a good ideology there, Stace. The idea of Christian founding fathers is really supportive of lots of Christians in our world.
Franklin, Jefferson, Washington, they were not Christians, they were deists. Mm-hmm. And deists believe there is a God, but does nothing, has no relationship. This is our job to make a garbage dump out of this world, or a citadel, golden citadel on the hill.
They'd certainly have to if they were going to create democracy. There's a lot of self-authority in that idea, right?
Well, the first constitution in the history of humankind, based on the rights of the individual over the government.
You know, I never thought about that, because the monarchies of Europe, that's Christian. It's hierarchical.
Of course.
But a democracy is far more holoarchical, so it makes sense that they'd be deists. Like, we've got to do this ourselves, you know. It's humanistically empowering.
So deism carries a lot more defensible universal truthism than fundamentalism Christianity does, for example, Christianity. Mm-hmm. So identity but then diverges. It starts with a stem of deism, but then diverges because it is intimately involved every single day in every one of our breaths. The breath of a plant, the breath of our own. It is not disengaged as deists.
Deism couldn't make an and between the omnipresence. They couldn't make omnipresence, but not controlling everything. So they threw the baby out with the bathwater, as everybody always does.
Exactly. So to make the historical reference so that people can create a category in their mental body about it, this is enlightened. Identity is enlightened deism when it comes to the divine being within which we are unfolding our own lives. It's intimately engaged, but it unfolds and grows at the level that its creations unfold and grow. That's all. It can't get outside of itself and say, what should I do to grow? It can't get outside of itself. So all it can do is unfold itself and learn from the inside, paradoxically, exactly how we learn. Mm-hmm. It's exactly how we learn. We do something on the outside that creates non-well-being in ourselves or someone else, in the best way of saying it, or gentlest. What on the inside drove me to that choice, which then led to my series of decisions based on that choice? We grow that way because that's the way divine being grows, everyone. So this should produce thousands of questions about how this might apply to your life. And we're going to have at some point here soon, Joseph tells me, a call-in program where when you can pull that out. And I'm sure he'll say something like, send in your questions and I'll randomly take 10 of them out of the 3,000 that you get. Wouldn't that be nice?
That would be great. I'd love to have that problem.
Yeah. So today was everything, all the opinions that identity offers with an open, curious hand as a universal truth to be tested, come out of the structure of divinity, our provenance, and resonate with what we've said today. And if you ever hear something coming out of my mouth or Joseph's mouth that doesn't seem to resonate with that, please let us know, because we're looking for that all the time.
Yeah.
All the time.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Well,
so to say,
go ahead.
Oh, you're welcome. Sorry.
Thank you so much, Stace. Go ahead.
I don't want to say God be with you, because it already is. Right. And that's a good closure for me to you, Mr. Man, who gives oxygen to identity at the moment, and you and a few others in the slaving around the world to try to make oxygen in a world that's choking on its own absolute truth-based carbon dioxide.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, may it dead end quickly.
Beautifully said.
Yeah. Well, thanks.
See you next week. Yeah, you bet.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Heart of Soul podcast. To learn more about Stace Barron and Identity, please visit identity.org. To learn more about Joseph Shapiro, visit clearandopen.com. Until next time, we wish you well on your journey.